Get in the know. Non-stop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com.
And in this case, it's actually Purple Access. It's Judd, as always. It's Declan, as always. And then we rotate Chip Scoggins, Star Tribune sports columnist, with our guy who joins us today, Tyler Fortness. You can hear him with Declan on Purple Daily on Draft on Mondays. And, of course, you can find his work at VikingsWire.com, which I also write columns for. And if you have not discovered it, VikingsWire.com is just a fantastic place for plenty of thoughtful pieces on the team. Your one-stop shopping for a team that certainly has a lot going on. And Tyler, let's start with that. 1-4 going into Chicago. And it's a stretch that's tough because, Kansas City was tough. They lost that game. It was a close game, but they still lost. They have the Bears, who are struggling but have started actually to put up some points in the past 2 weeks. Then San Francisco in a Monday night game here, and then at Green Bay. So in the big picture of things, at 1-4, trade deadline coming up October 31st, and Justin Jefferson sideline now. Give me your take on where things stand for a team that is keeping games close, but certainly has been a disappointment and continues to have problems hanging on to the football.
I think the one thing that really intrigues me with the absence of Justin Jefferson is how defenses are going to play us. They're not going to rotate coverage over to help cover Jefferson because there's no threat even close to the level of Jefferson right now on this team. I think Jordan Addison has the potential to get close. Hockenson, he's a mismatch style tight end, but if you put like a top corner on him, that's a strategy where you can actually take him out of the picture. So how are defenses going to play? Are they going to do the basic shell coverage and make Kirk Cousins methodically beat you down the field by like 1,000 cuts, which was the whole idea of the Fangio style defense that was run last year? We just ran it very poorly. And a lot of that had to do with Ed Donatel. We've talked about that ad nauseum, so that's not a secret to the listeners. But how are they going to play coverage? Is Jordan Addison going to be successful with that coverage, not having Justin Jefferson on the opposite side? Because we have to remember, he's 5 games into his career. So struggles right now, like, it's frustrating, but it's also not that big of a deal if he ends up struggling in this game because he's learning. He's a rookie. He needs to add some NFL muscle because he came into the league at 173 pounds. And you've seen some instances where he struggles against press coverage. So I want to see how they're going to adapt those coverages, how the Vikings adjust. Because at the end of that Kansas City game, what did they do? They threw a lot of like 5 and 7 yard routes. And that's not really conducive to attacking down the field. And those routes were like in the middle of the field. They're running like stick and levels concepts. Like, you have to attack down the field and on the outside to be able to move the ball down the field with no timeouts. And the Vikings just did not have the play calling to match that. So I want to see how everything's going to evolve. Is Kevin O'Connell going to still have his bag of tricks, or is he going to have to run a much more vanilla concept offense because he doesn't have the receivers to really utilize what he wants to do?
Jordan Addison having problems against press coverage potentially is something that we've talked about because of his size since the day he was drafted. So that's no surprise. He is, I don't think he's weak, but in this league, it's a man's league, and those corners are there to interrupt your ability to start your route. But where I will say I am encouraged is this: when you watch him play, when you watch him run his routes, I think when you watch him catch the football in stride, there, his ability to get off press coverage and his ability to block, definitely there are other things that need to improve, but he looks the part. And I really think that the next step now too is making him into, with Justin out, a playmaker, and not, he can go deep. He can actually this is the point in time too. I think it's a golden opportunity. If Jefferson was ever going to get hurt, it comes in a season in which the Vikings are obviously struggling. But I think this is a golden opportunity for the Vikings to find out what more they can get from Jordan, because I have not seen a thing that says that this kid might be a bust or was a bad pick. He looks like a very good pick, and I sort of like the challenge that he's going to face now, because it's going to challenge him more. But I think in the long run, what he is going to have to put up with Justin Jefferson out is going to help him actually improve quicker.
See, I think, like, none of us want the Vikings to lose. And I think we need to put that out there. The whole motif of this entire podcast network is we want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. We want them to win. But when you're analyzing this team and you talk about the future, sometimes losing is better because it gets you in a position to get that potential franchise quarterback. And along with losing comes opportunity for young players to get even more exposure. And I think the loss of Justin Jefferson is a net positive for the development of Jordan Addison in kind of the same ways you mentioned, Judd. He's going to get opportunities. He is going to be the de facto number one option into this offense right now because Hockenson is great, but he's not great in the same way as Travis Kelce is. He even talked about it in a media session last week where he praised Kelce and it's like, yeah, we watch film with tight end but I can't always take what he says because he is like an artist out there and he'll free ball. And that sounded like something that Kevin O'Connell does not want them to do. He wants them to be relatively structured. And it's also different because he doesn't have that type of relationship on the field with like Kirk Cousins that Holmes has with Kelce. And that's just a special relationship. So that's not a fault of anybody. It's just there's not that kind of magic. So Addison's your number one guy. How's he going to react? How's he going to be able to play in that situation this early in his career? And I'll be honest, it might be better if he stinks right off the bat because you learn from failure and you can go back on the tape and figure out what worked, what didn't, and how you can be better moving forward. Being great right away in this role would be awesome. But I think seeing some struggles early on could be more beneficial for him. And this Bears defense, they're getting back likely Kyler Gordon from that hand injury. They have Tyreek Stevenson, who's a brutal press man corner. And I really liked him coming out of the draft this past year. But opportunities arise from struggles. And a 1-4 record and no Justin Jefferson, this is that opportunity.
Bono, how difficult too is this balance of Hockenson, who's had some drops and honestly maybe a little bit of a disappointing season? Obviously, you still have to feed him, but at what point are there maybe repercussions if these drops or even, of course, the fumbles keep happening? I mean, Kevin O'Connell talked about they bought all these tools and they're trying to hold people accountable. But what happens if these like drops and fumbles keep popping up for Hockenson? Do you just keep feeding him the ball? Is there a time where you have to reprimand him and put him on the bench? Like, what if this becomes a thing with TJ Hockenson, and how do the Vikings maybe handle it if it does?
So the interesting part about the Hockenson debate is obviously he had the 3 quasi drops, and I'm not going to officially call them drops. They were difficult catches. They were ones that you expect Hockenson to be able to bring in more often than not because he's the special player and you gave him a lot of money. That's why you give him a lot of money. You expect him to make those tough catches. He just had a rough game in trying to make those tough catches against Kansas City. I wouldn't classify any of them as actual drops because he's extending out to the ball. It's all contested and they're tough. They're difficult. But the rest of his game, I don't think he's had a down season. He's been an excellent blocker. He's still making important catches. They're still trusting him on 4th down with those choice routes. And there's a reason why they have been that successful on 4th down, because he's able to win quickly off the line of scrimmage, and you go 5 yards, and then based on the leverage of the defender, you decide how you're going to attack. And he and Kirk Cousins have great chemistry with that. So I think with Hockenson, if he is dropping balls that are thrown like right at him, hit him in the hands, like square in the chest, I think that's an issue. But right now, I think you just have to count the Kansas City Chiefs game as a little bit of an anomaly. But if it happens again where he's missing multiple of those in a game, then I think we have to have a different conversation. I want to see a trend before I really come down hard on Hockenson, because the rest of his game has been really good. And I think the All-22 bears that out. But sometimes when you see multiple negative plays in a row from a player, they're high profile plays. So that's going to immediately seep into your brain as, hey, this guy's not playing very well. When in reality, the plays that don't necessarily get seen unless you're really diving deep into the tape are what's propelling him to having as good of a season as he has.
I think the frustrating thing with TJ in particular is this, and this also extends back to the Chargers game when there's the play where he doesn't catch the pass. Look, that's another tough catch. But I think the frustration is he skipped all of team drills as we know, because he was supposedly hurt, but his contract hadn't got done yet. And it's just been clear that the timing with Kirk on those very close passes has not been great. And it's hard not to say, there's a reason why you practice red zone in training camp every single day, because those are tough. That's a tough area to operate. So the thing about the Chiefs game, though, in particular, and because Kirk is such a polarizing guy, it's like all blame or no blame, was the timing with Kirk in that game was just off, period. TJ Hockenson, KJ Osborne. I still go back to the play that KJ was in the back of the end zone and ducked down on that sort of weird-looking pass by Kirk, which was not all on Kirk and probably was not all on KJ. That was an odd game. But Forno, when it comes to where this team is at, too, and look, they could come back like 2020 and win 3 or 4 consecutive games. We don't know. I don't think they're going to, but they could. But if we continue on the same path, and let's say they beat Chicago, which I think they can do, clearly. They lose to San Francisco. They go to Green Bay. That's a sort of a toss-up, but let's say they lose that game. Who do you want to see play more? Like, if we get to a point where it's time to start to not throw in the towel, but, just get a better look at guys. And I'm talking from Lewis Cine to guys in this draft class potentially that aren't playing a ton. Who do you think would benefit? Who do you think would be good to get more of their work on film if the season continues to trend to one where it's going to be a disappointment?
I think you just got to load up all the young guys in defense and just deal with the lumps. If you really end up 2-6 at the trade deadline, there's a decent chance that you see guys who won't be here next year, you move on from, because that's not an admission of tanking. It's just understanding and selling. We've had the conversation before, Judd. It's baseball. Baseball at the trade deadline. You don't trade cornerstone pieces. You trade assets that are on expiring contracts. Or like I still remember the Twins. Ryan Presley got the save last night. They traded him 5-6 years ago when he had 1 year left on his deal, but they got a decent haul back. So those are the kind of moves you make at the deadline. And I want to see all the young guys play. You have all these questions about Lewis Cine, Brian Asamoah, Andrew Booth Jr., a lot of frustration from the fan base that they just haven't produced. My theory on why they haven't produced is their aggressiveness has led to being undisciplined. And in an aggressive scheme, you need to be very disciplined, because a mistake when you're being really aggressive can cost you touchdowns, and it can cost you touchdowns very, very quickly. So I would want those guys to play just a lot of snaps. And you know what? Sometimes with that kind of aggression and discipline, you need reps in order to kind of fix that kind of thing. Yes, film helps, but being able to apply it on the field makes a lot of difference. The other guy I'd want to see is Andre Carter. I don't think he's ready to play. And he had a few pressures in the one game that he really played a lot. I think it was against the Panthers. But at the end of the day, getting him on the field and getting him reps against NFL competition while he's still growing and developing, I think could really help and impact him, even though I don't think he'll impact the game very much. But he's a long-term project. And obviously, with coming from Army, you are essentially telling your body to F off by going both routes with how you're training. You're training to be a cadet, which is all endurance training. And then you're training to be a football player, which is all explosive drills and being able to do a lot of things in short bursts and not have a lot of like long endurance. It's like being a sprinter versus running cross country. They're two completely different things. So seeing him get those reps on the field, so then when he goes to the offseason, he knows a little bit more about what it's going to take and how he can continue to progress and grow forward. Maybe he can be a really good rotational piece in year 2 with another offseason, like an actual full offseason of an NFL strength and conditioning program. That's how I would approach it. Get young guys a lot of reps and see if they're any good, or if you can trust them going into next year.
If there's a loss to the Bears on Sunday, Forno, and obviously we'll break a lot of this down too on Purple Daily on Draft, but do you think the selling conversation just reaches a whole new level at that point if they go into Soldier Field and lose to a Bears team? Maybe it looks a little bit better in the last few weeks, but if that's the case, do you think these selling plans are just trending in the all arrow pointing towards sell direction?
Theoretically, yes, but we don't know how Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and ownership is going to handle this, because there's only been one truly bad season under the Wilfs ownership, and that was 2013. And we all know that it was kind of like a house of cards, and Leslie Frazier, albeit a really good overall coach, was just not ready and not a good coach at that specific time. And that kind of just tanked. You obviously had the demise of Christian Ponder. and Matt Castle started most of that year. And then that ended up bringing in Mike Zimmer, and then they really righted the ship. And at very worst, they were capable to win every single game that they played in. And outside of the first year, the worst year that they had was 7-9. Like, that's what the Wilfs want. They want that kind of consistency. Will they be okay with selling off some of those assets that won't be here next year? I genuinely don't know. And I think Kwesi is going to look at it from an analytical and mathematical standpoint. Okay, we're 1-5. We're not making the playoffs this year. How can we improve our team long-term moving forward? And can we do so by selling off some assets that aren't coming back? I think he's going to say yes. Will ownership agree and support that decision? I think that's the biggest question here because of how they've always approached roster management and wanting to win football games.
So in down seasons, Spielman never really sold off. They traded Ngakoue in 2020, but when things were spiraling in 2010, they did not really do much. 11
they traded for Moss in that season.
Yes, because they thought because Sidney Rice screwed them, and then in 11 they didn't do much, and the same thing. So they have never dumped before. But I will say, what's interesting about this is, I don't think you fire Spielman, and to a certain point, more Rick, but to a certain point, Zimmer, if you're not going to allow your philosophy to be changed. So that's where I'm curious about this, because they, it's interesting, but 2022 was clearly, the Wilfs had their fingerprints on saying, we think this is still a pretty good team. Zimmer didn't do a good job. Like, we fell apart. I felt like the team, not the players themselves, but the franchise was fractured. Mm-hmm. And O'Connell and Kwesi came in, kept the status quo, and I think the Wilfs were sort of proven right. Like, the team was like, yeah, resurgent. It was great. But the long play here, when you go to a GM with an analytical background and a coach who's a young coach, who, by the way, I think is in charge of trying to find your next quarterback, is to embrace this opportunity right now. So, like, if Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and the current front office has the thumb put on them now of the Wilfs, it really makes no sense. So this, to me, is going to be one of the most interesting things for an ownership group that bought this team in 2005. This is going to be one of the most interesting things, because if they were serious about making the changes that they made, then you are eventually going to allow this administration to see things through. And that does not mean hanging on to players who are inevitably probably going to walk in March. It means trying to at least trade a couple. They're not going to trade 5 guys, but, and they're probably not going to trade Kirk, but trying to at least find out and identify who you can trade and who's going to get you a nice haul back.
I think the one guy who really fits that motif, Judd, is Danielle Hunter. And I really wonder, did the Vikings actually try to really lock him down long term? But because it was kind of described to us at the time that this was a Band-Aid. And they've done a lot of Band-Aids with Hunter, and it's not this administration's fault that Hunter kept being given Band-Aids year over year. But that's kind of just how it's happened. And they gave him one. They gave him a big raise this year. But do they actually want him long term? Now, you can have that discussion whether you think he's worth it long term. And there are diminishing returns when you have edge rushers on a third contract. And I think when I wrote about a potential extension for Hunter, a third contract is probably going to net you less than $20 million a year, or at the very most 20. Von Miller got 20. Chandler Jones got 17, and he's got released for reasons completely outside of football. But the performance was apropos of about $17 million. Hunter, I don't think is worth the Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa contracts. I think he's around a $20 million a year guy, and I don't know if they want to pay that. So I'm very curious to see how they'll approach that. And maybe trading Hunter is the smartest play for your long-term success, because at the very best, you'd get a 3rd round compensatory pick in 2025. What if somebody offers you a 2nd round pick next year? That's inherently better, but are they willing to take that risk of him not coming back? Like, there's so many intriguing elements, but I would look at it from the perspective of who's on an expiring contract and who's not coming back. I think the 2 names that really stick out, the 3 names, Ezra Cleveland, KJ Osborne, Jordan Hicks. And I think Hicks He's played fantastic football this year. I think a team like the Buffalo Bills just lost Matt Milano. Get a 4th rounder from Buffalo for Jordan Hicks. I think that's a little bit of an overpay, but they desperately need a quality linebacker. And I think that would be a situation where, hey, he goes into Buffalo, he plays in a system that he's already played in before, and I think it could work. But how they approach it is going to be fantastic and really interesting to watch. And quite frankly, it's like deadlines have never been really fun in football. It feels like this deadline is going to be fun watching for Minnesota, like it is for like the Timberwolves and Twins every year.
Well, it might be a little rhetorical here, but what do the Vikings just have to do to beat the Bears on Sunday? Is this just simply not turning the GD football over 5 times when you're in the red zone? And like, what are you looking to see from the Vikings, I guess, also just for them to get a big win at Soldier Field and maybe potentially still save their season?
I think everything with the Vikings right now comes down to discipline. You have to play disciplined football, and that means not having penalties at the wrong times, not turning the football over. A -9 turnover differential is, in my opinion, the entire reason why this team is 1-4. Like, you can point to, oh, they've struggled here, they've struggled there. Well, the defense, you've turned the ball over 12 times. The defense is getting usurped every single time, and they have to try and fix that mistake. It's incredibly hard, Declan, to fix a mistake like that. And that's why points off turnovers is such an intriguing element when you talk about how they're going to end up like winning these football games. If you have multiple points off turnovers every single game, like, that's brutal. And that's really hard to overcome. That's why turnover differential, if you have a positive turnover differential, you're more likely winning the football game. Like, some of those elements need to come into play, and the Vikings need to have better discipline. They need to have better communication too, which comes into that discipline argument. The non-spike from the Chargers game, like, if you are going to run a play right away, which in my opinion is the smart move, you should run a play right after that. But there's 34 seconds. You should have had a second play called in the huddle already. You get up to the line, you snap it with like 23 seconds to go. You're already ready to rock. The problem is they didn't do that. Is that on O'Connell? Is that on Cousins? I think it's a little bit of both. You should have already had that ready to go. And then all of a sudden the play's over. There's 15 seconds left. You've got 3 shots at the end zone because you have 4 opportunities to try and get it in there. That's how, those discipline things all matter. And they were situational masters last year. They kind of lost that this year. Why is that? Why all of a sudden are they making these mistakes they didn't make last year when it was such a focus? Did they kind of tune that back and realize, hey, we have a better team this year overall, and we believe we can take a big step with these young players, and they didn't focus enough on that situational stuff? I'm honestly baffled to why the discipline has been so lacking.
And you're right. That comes down to a lot of coaching. I mean, Kevin O'Connell's had a bad year. Kevin O'Connell has had a bad year. The lack of timeouts in the second half last weekend is largely, or is on, O'Connell and his game theory coach, who I thought had an outstanding 2022, and I don't know what the hell happened there. But yes, I mean, we can blame Kirk for sure for some things. I would have preferred Kirk at the point in the Chargers game just stepped up to the line, spiked the ball, because then they complained about the crowd noise. Okay, you quiet the crowd by spiking the ball. But all of that being said, yeah, there is no question that for all the things, Tyler, that went right for Kevin O'Connell a year ago, they have not. And look, you cannot turn over the football as much as this team has and not have it come back to coaching too. Like at some point in time, if it's 1 game or 2 games, it might be a fluke. If you're now 5 games in and you have this problem continually, and you said, like Declan said, we've gone out and bought all these gadgets to help with this. This is, I mean, there is a definite discussion to have about coaching, about game theory, about the clock. And I think that's been the thing that's been alarming because it was so well done a year ago. And O'Connell, for lack of a better term, this is a sophomore slump. He is having a coaching sophomore slump.
He really is. And I think you can remedy it. I think Sunday's game against the Chiefs was somewhat of an anomaly because it was almost like multiple things like coming together. But how is he going to learn from this? How is he going to grow and evolve? because I think his success last season was somewhat of an anomaly, an outlier. Being that great right away and having so many of these things go your way helps, but it also helps mask some of the flaws, because success, like, you don't talk about how much like something stinks when you're really playing well. You're really accentuating the positives, and when things go bad, you accentuate the negatives. That's human nature. I think the amount of struggles this year is just being amplified by the fact that nothing's going our way. And I think he can right the ship. Will he? That's another question.
And the learning thing. You're so right about that.
It is a big learning thing. And he's a second-year head coach. He's what, 41 years old?
Oh, yeah.
He's young. He's figuring it out. And being able to figure it out is a huge part of the learning curve of being a head coach. I think having a couple former head coaches on staff is really beneficial. We know how Mike Zimmer, he brought on like 6 former head coaches on his staff because he wanted to have sounding boards. And then I think he got a little over his head and too big for his britches, and then just started really taking over every single element instead of trusting his team. But O'Connell having those sounding boards, I think, is good. And it really sounds, from the tone of his talking to the media and how he and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah really approached this, that he is a big proponent of the collaboration element. And give him time. He's
100%. 100%.
Don't have
You're
to
right.
be fired. And I know some in the fan base have asked for both these guys to be fired. Look, give them time. They won 13 games with a roster that was aging, and they were those situational masters, and you were never going to be able to duplicate that situational master stuff. But this type of flipping the script and being really bad at it is just wild. And I think that's an anomaly too.
Great stuff, sir. Again, Tyler joins Declan, Purple Daily on the Draft on Mondays. Also, VikingsWire.com, which I write for as well. He's my boss there. Ordinarily, I do a good job. Sometimes I screw up, but that's okay because he's forgiving. Declan, tell the folks what they need to know.
Yeah, hit the subscribe button for daily Minnesota Vikings entertainment. This is Purple Daily, where we just want to see the Vikings win a Super Bowl before we die.